Good afternoon. It's Dr. B. It's 2 p.m. on Monday, maybe a day or two. I'm not sure if I'm late or early on my this week's video, but just wasn't going to happen yesterday. Not because I was obsessed with Super Bowl things, but because I was busy. Serious, simply as that. Simple as that. And I was also doing things St. John's on Saturday. So it is what it is. Uh, so I think I'm ahead of the game anyway, because this class in my head, even though it's asynchronous, starts in air quotes on um, midweek someplace. So we're well ahead of midweek as we head toward a winter break, which makes me also think out loud. I just thought of this as we're talking, and I'm going to talk quickly, is many of you will be, I don't know where too many of you work, but many of you work in the city. I don't even know if the city has a winter break. Um, I just don't know that. I know that most of the suburbs do, whether it be Long Island or the Westchester area. I know some of you would know work up in Yonkers, up around that corner of the world. So I'm going to presume that there is no winter break, because if there were a winter break, I would have made this course asynchronous. And since this class is asynchronous, it occurs to me that I could just keep plowing forward. So I'll have the material up, and I'll just continue as if there is a class next week, just so you know that. And if there isn't one, I'll find a way to I'll compensate that to you somehow up the road. I also remember that St. John's academic calendar has a spring break up around Easter. So certainly we'll be taking off whatever day those are. I don't pay attention to those things till I get closer. So enough said. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't want you to think I was overlooking your needs. So if you're going to go to Acapulco, then by all means do that. Speaking of Acapulco, I can't believe I'm even bringing this up. There's one of those streaming video shows on Apple TV Plus that's called Acapulco, and it's kind of silly. But if you have nothing to do, I mean nothing to do, and I'm sure you have plenty of things to do, what with your work week and your families and so forth. But if you had nothing to do, take a crack at watching one or two of these. I wish I could create a discussion question about it. It's all PG-13 things. It's nothing out of line, but it's just a silly story that I'm getting a kick out of. Enough said. So let me do is I'll bring up the agenda, and you'll see it's rather short, but it's just jam full with all sorts of good things. This I promise you, as soon as I can find where it is. I think I just did. So I'm going to bring up my famous weekly agenda. And there it is. And the first thing you'll notice is virtually identical to last week's, and that's on purpose. I have found this particular kind of assignment, the one we began to play with last week, cannot be repeated often enough. It's as though I'm presuming that most of you really have zero experience in thinking this way. And in order for you to begin to acquire the muscles to think this way, you have to keep at it. So I'm going to come back and forth to it pretty much throughout the semester, in as much as I'm really trying to get you prepared for the last assignment of the semester, which would be an action plan, which would be primarily concerned with your implementing a plan to get a multi-age class school implemented. No easy task. By the way, I loved the responses that I saw on the discussion questions regarding to this, and I think I left one up for this week as well, as you continue to read the book. And I don't disagree with some of your yes buts, by the way. I think some of your yes buts are well taken. All the more reason to get this action planning muscle under your belt or in your biceps, whichever place you want it to move forward. So I'm going to continue to beat this drum so that you kind of get it, become part of your own leadership language, so to speak. And we also need to, without a doubt, we also need to, that's where I'm looking for, embed this premise into the fact that you're project leaders. And we need to kind of twist and turn this a little bit towards that kind of thinking more and more as this course evolves. And you'll be surprised about some of the things that we're going to do with that. Okay, so now we have, again, some of this is pretty much identical, right? But it's where we are. I know that you see an action plan above that. I'm going to come back. No, let me stay here for a minute. You'll see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 material, so to speak. One is a video about needs assessment, something I think that I don't think you have any kind of muscle for. You're just not trained to have it, and we're going to start training you to have that. Another one is I know I had this from last week as well. You really must watch this 5 why video. I'm going to repeat myself about it in a few minutes, but you really should watch the video, as well as this very much briefer video called Fishtail, which is another way to get at root cause. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. There's also a chart. I don't think I have the material, the template for it here, and I'll save that for the following week. There's also a chart, or rather another video about what we call SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis, I'll explain better in a moment, but SWOT analysis is a needs assessment device, if nothing else. It's an acronym. The acronym stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's a business device. It's also used in schools by school leadership, where you identify what the strengths of your organization are, of your school are, the strengths of the weaknesses of that same organization, and the threats to that organization, which is a little trickier to explain to a public school audience for the most part, as well as opportunities. That is to say, strategies or things you could do to leverage the other 3 pieces of the graphic towards blunting the threats and magnifying the strengths. Blunting the strengths, lessening the weaknesses, and increasing this. I'm sorry, one more time. Answering the threats, diminishing the weaknesses, and strengthening the strengths. That sounds better. I should make a video about that. I've been promising you a video about Finland educational system, and as soon as this stops today, I'm going to set that up to get going for 3 o'clock actually. And so the video for that will be up, and the link for that will be there. It'll be a YouTube link like everything else. So you have 2 YouTube links. You'll have the YouTube link to this agenda and this discussion, and then you'll have another YouTube link in the materials to watch the analysis of the Finnish education system, both from a leadership perspective and from a teacher's perspective. I have 2 students who have become doctors under my mentorship, and probably 7 or 8 years ago, maybe even a little longer than that. Dr. Jackie Amarato and Dr. Kim Lakato, and they both went together to Finland while they were doing their doctorates. One was doing their study of how leaders were developed in Finland, and the other one was doing the same thing as far as teachers are concerned. Not a lot of difference between the 2, actually, when you look at how Finland approaches it. One of the lines of what you see in the Tomlinson book, quite frankly. And I'm definitely going to bring this question up. I haven't done the video yet, but I'm going to definitely bring up the question of English is the second, Finnish is the second language, because there are minority groups in Finland that have to be accommodated as well as the general Finnish population. And they'll talk to that, and you'll see some perspective that might encourage you to think differently about certain things. Going to skip the template for a moment, and let's go back down to housekeeping goals for a moment. These are some of those Mickey Mouse things that I feel we need to do all the way through, and that would be. I mentioned this last week. I emailed this. I talked about it last week's video, and I said it would probably switch up a little bit as we move along, and it did. maybe a day after I posted that up, I got a phone call from Dr. Kodak and Dr. I forgot her name. It'll come to me in a minute. Who it'll come to me in a second. I have a face right in front of me. Who had actually conversations about this internship switch that we've made. They made, actually have informed me about Dr. D. Figueroa, and that's the other person. And so I'm going to clarify that. So what I'm going to do is say, I know that there's two people in this class, and I can't remember one of your names because you haven't called me yet, but one of you is Dolce, and the other one's Lady Edema. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You haven't called me yet, or I asked you to, who are presenting at this workshop in about a month. So they're going to get waived from the parent engagement activity altogether. The rest of you who may be attending or may not still are responsible for trying to get your principal or chairs and wherever you work to publicize this workshop to anyone who might be interested. Even though it's all the way out here in Wading River, it's okay if you don't get them to go. We're not going to, give you points by how many people will be willing to go, but we certainly would like for you to publicize it, to engage the parents of your building to do that, and that's going to be part of your internship activities as such. Stay tuned. I'm probably going to need to clarify this again because it seems to be a kind of a moving target at St. John's. But that's essentially what we're going to do. I will repeat it probably one more time, maybe I guess next week, and then I'm going to sort of let it lie until March. As far as the assignments are concerned, they remain the same. You have journals to do, not every week, and you have discussions to do more weeks than the journal, but not every week either. Sometimes we double up on it, and I'm really tempted sometimes to give you more journal assignments or discussion assignments than the original syllabus called for, but I don't want to turn you folks inside out, so I don't do that. So I'm trying to keep them to a reasonable amount as we move through. And then I believe this past week I said this, I assigned the same premise as before, which is to say to continue to skim Dr. Koza's book. I'm going to get into chapter 2 and maybe a little bit of 3 today. I don't want to move too quickly through it. There's a lot of material in here. Not all of it is particularly new. There's not as though Dr. Koza invented all these ideas, but the way she arranged it is Dr. Koza. And our thinking is certainly invested into this whole premise of multi-age classrooms. I mentioned to somebody today when I was answering a discussion question that long before any of you were born, in fact, it was the first or second year when I was teaching, way back, a school in the district in which I taught had a multi-age classroom approach. And with elementary school, I was in middle school at junior high at that time, and we were responsible for learning about that school because those kids were part of about a fourth of the kids who we would get in 7th grade. By the way, you could tell who they were in about a minute and a half because they were different kinds of kids. They were trained to think creatively, independently, and assertively far differently than the other buildings. It was very clear. And what they had done, and Jerry Devlin had put in a program of multi-age well before anybody knew what it was called. And no walls, different grade students all in the same place. Kids were helping each other, and he had something called, I mentioned this in one of the responses to the discussions, called contract learning, which was a big piece of what this was about. And contract learning was kind of a promise that a student would make to a teacher and vice versa, so that they could pick a topic that they wanted to work on that incorporated all the skills and content of their given grade level, but also kind of melted back into another grade level where they would have to do certain things, certain activities, certain kinds of research and so forth in order to move on successfully. And each the teacher and the principal, the teacher and the student would sign off on it, and they'd move along in this big classroom approach. The walls all pushed aside. It was kind of neat to see. Yeah, it was very neat to see, and it was very, very encouraging. It did not last. It fell apart after 6 or 7, maybe less than that, 6 or 7 years. Reason for that was quite a few. One was the principal didn't particularly sell it well to the community. The community just never understood it. It was far away from their traditional outlook of what schools should be. A. B, he began to let down. The teachers didn't roll by drink the Kool-Aid on it either, and so the shared vision became very, very murky, and that began to become a climate problem culturally in the building. And then the other piece too was I don't know how well he was able to. I'm not sure if he didn't. I'm not saying he didn't want to, but was able to continue to develop his teachers, nurture them to know how to work with students in this kind of environment. So it fell apart. Wasn't too long after, somewhere early in my career where I remember they all went back. They put the walls back up, and they all went to structured individual grade classrooms. For those reasons, I keep those in mind because those things must be accounted for when you try to put this project leader approach into your assignment. So with that, real quick, I'm just going to say these are the content goals for today. I'm going to go over this Leithwood article, which I have attached for you, because I think it applies to all of these conversations. And when I say BC, I'm connecting it to Dr. Koza. I'm going to go back over what root causes are, and this whole issue of what's in yellow, what do you know, what do you not know, what do you not know that you don't know, and continuing to model this assignment. So what we're going to do now is go back to modeling this assignment. Now, I'm not going to take the time. I'm tempted to. I'm not going to take the time to show you these videos. That's your time, okay? And we'll clock it off to 3 hours roughly per week that you're responsible for this course. Watch it any way you want. Watch it, while you watching Acapulco, he smiled, or while you have making scrambled eggs in the morning, whichever way you want to do it. But you really need to watch these videos because they're skill sets. Now, I got challenged about these by another class, not this class. Another class was challenging me on that. And they know what they said? And I got very upset, actually, that they said it. Although looking back on it, I kind of understand why they were questioning it. They said, and I'm practically quoting, we have never seen their principals, their leaders, ever do any of these things. So why should they have to learn? Now, listen to the tone of my voice. You can see that bothered me a lot. Now, they were practicing teachers, and they were in buildings where I'm sure they weren't lying, that their principals were not doing needs assessments. They were not running 5 whys at their staff or fishtails or trying to get them to analyze the weaknesses and strengths of their buildings. This is really unfortunate. And I believe them because out here on Golden Long Island, which is nowhere near as golden as they would have you believe in most places, out here on Golden Long Island, you can get away with not being very good and the students will still moderately achieve well. And so there's a high level of mediocrity on Long Island that is passable. And so maybe a principal in a given district, I can't even think of what districts this would be, doesn't feel the need to try to improve their school district for one reason or another. In your case, to improve the approaches to working with E&L children. They wouldn't have the slightest of what to do. And I talked about this a couple of weeks ago with you, where when I was teaching this same class back in the fall, it had a principal of I think it was a charter school in Brooklyn, said she had, I'm not sure if it was a charter school, she had 17 children from Columbia show up in one day. That's when these great masses of kids of immigrants were being brought in, and it's continued to be coming in. And she said, what do I do with 17 kids who don't Canada speaking? And I'm sure you've heard these things before. And she really had to quickly analyze her systems, reorganize what they do in order to moderately meet the needs of those children. That doesn't happen on Long Island. So there's no need sometimes to feel like the need to get changed. There is a saying I will leave with you, and somebody write it on your hand. And it's not my original phrase, not mine. So when you stop trying to get better, you stop being good. It's a Pat Riley saying, by the way, for those of you who know Pat Riley is, although some people attribute it to some other people as well. When you stop trying to get better, you stop being good. And so if Long Island does what I call the tortoise and the hare story, if you remember that, where the tortoise is lumbered off in the race and just went slow and steady, wins the race, where the rabbit or the hare rather, hung out on the tree for the most part because he knew he was going to win the race until the tortoise passed him and won. You can be the tortoise or the hare and future for what you need to take care of. And so, what do you begin with? You begin with a vision. Now, this is kind of a little bit maybe out of sequence, but here it comes. This was the goal I gave you last week, and you could please throw it away and come up with your own goal. This was Bernardo's goal from last week, and I still kind of like it. Where I said that the goal was to, or in this case, was the division mission, insofar as E&L programs and students are involved. That's not even a sentence. The vision mission, insofar as E&L programs and students are involved within the context of a multi-age classrooms, must be considered, must be provided for. And you do not, I think you realize that from what I'm seeing from your conversation in the discussion. I think you realize you just don't snap a finger and snap, or do Tinkerbell's wand and suddenly it's puff, it's there. It takes a tremendous amount of planning in order for it to hit the streets. But it can't hit the streets if you bring it in properly. So I've got a vision, okay, and I've got a criteria, and I apologize for the quality of this chart. For some reason, I can't make it bigger than it is. So you can see that the second column speaks to how will I measure that? I'm not answering that for you. So the question is, how will you know that division has been achieved or is in the process of being achieved? How will you know that you're meeting your preferred future? Not your probable, your preferred future. How will you know that? How can you show that to the outside world? You need to get that straight in your own head. And then what's the criteria for that? Now, you would write that criteria here, okay, for this goal. Just understand the formatting here because it's a little tricky. However, the strategies to bring off that noble goal go deeper, and they go in the second column. Okay? Now, before I do these strategies, I'm going to give you one down here. There should be on the first one. I didn't put it there. You need to consider how to do or what to do how will you can't just say I know what they need. Can't do that, he shouted. How will you do needs assessment? How will you do needs assessment? That's the question. And that comes back up to all four of these videos right here. I'm going to go through them roughly, kind of slowly. The videos do a better job than I'm doing in the space of time I'm allotting myself today. So the first video is kind of a broad conversation. And by the way, it's not aimed at schools. That particular video is aimed at business, just so you know. Some of them, I think all of them are actually. But don't worry about that. They're still absolutely relevant to school organizational thinking. So the easiest way is just to ask people what they think. So that the fancy word for that is focus groups. But there are other words as well. Interview people individually, walk around and observe, and write down what observations you think you see going on. One or maybe several of you are thinking, well, I can do a survey, and I'm fine with a survey. And by the way, you don't have to make up the survey. But a survey is a decent way to get feedback about how people see something, but it doesn't mean that they're right. Because their perception of something doesn't mean that they're necessarily correct about it. Surveys can be dangerous if you ask the wrong question. I may have said these to you before. It's a bad joke I use when I talk about how to create surveys, especially with my doctoral students. If I said to you, and please, I apologize if this offends you in any fashion or form. It's just an example. If I ask you, answer yes or no, did you stop beating your dog? That's a terrible question in so many ways. It's a horrible question. But that's how crazy some questions on a survey can be, especially if you see some of the surveys that you may see on Facebook or some places. I mean, they're just terrible nonsense, all contrived to get you to think in a way that they want you to think. It's not a survey that's seeking your valid input and objective thinking at all. Surveys are not easy to use. Be careful with that. But you can survey, but it isn't enough. You can do focus groups of parents. You can do focus groups of children. You can, up to a point. You can do focus groups of your teachers, of your fellow administrative colleagues, of the community. To what extent is this building meeting those needs? To understand whether those kids are getting what they need to be functioning citizens in that community. The answer isn't sure. You have to get the information, but if you got to get the information into a pot, or a test tube is maybe a better example, that needs to be distilled, boiled down to the bottom. What lies on the bottom of that test tube, of that beaker as such. And so you need to watch this video about needs assessment. You need to consider how or whether you would use 5 whys and or fishtails or any number of other top ways to approach this. Like I said last week, I'm modeling it again with the same model example I probably used last week, is you ask a why question 5 times and you build off that why question. You don't make up 5 questions. Any old questions you use for 5 why question, and then you use a why from the first why and then a why from the second why to get to the root cause as such. This is the one I always use. I've been using it for a long time. I probably use it with you as well. Why were you late, Johnny? I didn't wake up on time. Why didn't you wake up on time? The clock didn't go off. Why didn't the clock go off? It wasn't set. Why wasn't it set? They were having another fight. That's the root cause. So the short story is, when you ask for why questions that are built off each other and you craft them properly, you can get people to get to more nearly to the root causes, plural, that are out there. A great way to get at root causes. Great way, and it's a great way to get people to think. And if you're still teachers, if you are teachers right now, I urge you to try it out on your kids tomorrow. I don't care how old they are. Try it out. They won't like it. Their hair will hurt. But in the end, if you try it every once in a while, just tell them, hey, this is a 5 why, they'll begin to think differently about what really makes things happen. What's the cause and effect relationships that they tend to forget about? And it gets you to the root causes based on the needs assessment. Now you're starting to rock and roll. The fishtail does the same thing. It's just another graphic organizer. But then what you want to do is you want to do a SWOT. Now, a SWOT, and again, there's other graphic organizing approaches that are better than this nowadays, I think. But a SWOT is where you ask something about the organization, about the school in your case, and say, well, what's the strength of your school? Well, it's huge. It's big. We have lots of services. We have big building. We have lots of different courses going on. That's a strength. And someone will say, well, I think that's a weakness. There's too many kids here, and we can't account for them all. Kids fall through the cracks. So, yeah, by the way, there's nothing wrong with having a dialogue about which way you want to go with that. So you lock those 2 pieces. And the threats are the threats. Now, in the city, I don't know why that does that. The city, it already does what I'm about to say. And it almost never happens on Long Island. It's almost happened a couple of times, but none ever have actually happened where the state will step in and say, this school is doing so poorly, we're closing it. We may keep the building, but we're going to close the school. Everybody's fired, principal included. And we're going to break that school up into different kinds of schools within those walls. Those of you who work in the city know more about that than I do, actually. And then people reorganize themselves to try to do different things. So that might be an answer to go with as well. But I can't go forward and make strategies if I don't have the root causes. So the strategies must be tied into the root causes. Now, these strategies that I have here are not in any kind of order. In fact, I do have needs assessment in the second row rather than the second row rather than the first. So I put it down twice. You should come up with several strategies. I'm not going to tell you how many in order to implement this multi-age community, school community you're talking about. But it always starts with needs assessment. That's your first one. And then how would you go about putting it in place? Another hint, I don't think I made this hint last week. Not right away, but somewhere in these strategies, as you move down this column, you pilot something. Maybe you do one grade or two grades. I guess you have to start with two with multi-age. And then, but you don't start with everything all at once because then you just can't sustain all of what it's about. There's too many things you need to learn while the plane is flying. Now we go up to this next. This is really the red one is very important. How will you know that you've identified the potential if you think the root cause is communication issues? How will you know? Well, 10 people out of 20 complained about bad communication. Okay. You may want to get even deeper than that, but at least you get something to work from. All right. So basically, you need to come up with how will you know that this multi-age system that you're putting in place is working? How will you know what the parents are thinking? How will you know? After the strategies, this is in some ways, this is the most important column. So you can't have this column without having this column. And you can't have that column without having the first one. You'll notice again, though, that there's only, I drop down a box. I go beneath the goal to get the strategies. And how will you do this? I was just grading papers this morning from another course on this. It's a different approach in that class. And everything happens at once. Excuse me? Oh, you do a needs assessment and you build a building the same day. Excuse me. I mean, duh. You have to think it through. What's the timetable? First this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Is the timetable falling all over each other? You're building a building and hiring teachers the same day? Come on. Be logical about the sequence. There's a sequence to this to make it all work. What do you need? Come on, tell me, what do you need? You know you need, okay, of course you need money. Of course you need time. Hello, you need expertise, but it doesn't always cost money, by the way. Now, if this were a true plan, you would say, I need 25 teachers by September 1st, 2023. 10 more teachers than I've had now. Okay, well, every teacher costs $100,000. So we're talking about 10 times 100, that's $1 million. I need $1 million to hire more teachers. Now, I'm not asking you to do that. It's too hard to do for this premise. But an issue might be, for example, in terms of a multi-age classroom, you need a place to do this. I just thought of that. And if this is really devoted to serving the needs of your English E&L population, I might need some true, innovative, unique technological things that maybe the general population does not need. Okay. And then the last column is who's responsible. Now, this is hard to do when you're doing this in a course. If you were truly doing this, on the ground in your building, even as an intern, you would say, okay, well, Mr. Smith is the custodian, and then we need two Mr. Smiths. Who's responsible for hiring Mr. Smith? Dr. Jones, who runs the buildings and grounds. Who's responsible for that? Who's responsible for assuring that the E&L data is given properly to both the gen ed teachers and to the E&L teachers? Who gets the data? Who helps the teachers? This is a biggie right here. If you're reading these books, you know what I'm talking about. Who creates the human capital here to assure yourself that the teachers can address this by looking at the data? And this is something you're going to hear about in this video I'm going to post in about an hour. Although you won't have to look at it today as such. So who's responsible? Now, in real life, you would say Mr. Jones, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Simpson, whoever it is you're thinking of. Okay? Who's that principal in Abbott Elementary? I forgot her name. Her name's Simpson? That's a good show to watch. Learn about urban schools and I mean, it's supposed to be funny, but it also does deal with our urban school issues too, if you have a chance to watch that. Wednesday night on ABC, 9 o'clock. So I'm going to do this again next week. All right. I'm going to continue to go over this. Now, what I'm going to invite you to do, and this is only an invitation. Later on, I'm going to require it, but not yet. You could draft. Don't draft this. Don't draft the action plan. Just draft a couple of paragraphs telling me how you would begin to approach this issue. If you send it to me, I will respond and say, yeah, you're right on target here. You're missing this issue. I'll give you feedback. It's just the beginning. I'm just trying to get your toe in the water so you don't try to get this done at the end of April, because it just won't work. You won't be able to pull it together and you'll be losing some valuable time. In my mind, I don't know the answer to this, but I suspect, although I have seen some research about this a couple of months ago, I just remembered. This shows how multi-aids classrooms are very amenable to working with ENL or any children in need approach as such. Okay. So you can see I wrote this down here. Email me what you're thinking. Well, only if you have the time to do it. It's not an assignment. Email it to me. Email me what you're thinking, if you're thinking. If you're not thinking, then don't email me. But if you're thinking of something, even if it's a couple of lines, I'll answer you. I mean, not right away. I'm not the fastest always responding to those things, but I will. Okay? All right, now we are just going to go briefly. I already talked about clarifying this workshop on March 16th and what your roles are with it. Let's talk about Dr. Coze's book a little bit. Oh, before we do that, let's go to the Leithwood article, just to spend a few minutes on that. Oh, come on, that's not what I want. Okay. And I'm presuming you can see this. I think you can see it. I mean, let me stop the share for a minute, make sure that it's up. Sometimes I wonder about whether my shares are working. You had this article in that link. It's a pretty good article, I thought. So we'll work with this article for the moment. And again, it's not an assignment to read straight away. But the article is by Kenneth Leithwood, who is a well-known educational reformer writer. And he's basically talking about our friends in Ontario again. Okay, where we say Ontario school system in Canada is a model school system for school reform, held up in pretty much in the same category, same lane level as the Finnish schools, as the schools in Singapore, schools in Shanghai, to a lesser extent, much lesser extent in my estimation. And so I'm not going to read this to you. It's called about lessons for leadership. So how to create turnaround schools. Let's presume that these multi-aids classrooms that you're creating out of the Dr. Koza material is about a turnaround school and how to go about doing that. So again, I'm not reading all this to you. Here's issue number one. You do it in stages, he shouted. You don't do it with a blunderbuss. If you know what a blunderbuss is, it's a shotgun. I don't know how many of you have ever seen a Tom and Jerry cartoon where Tom used to chase Jerry with a shotgun to get the mouse, and he would shoot at the wall and blow the whole wall down instead of getting Jerry the mouse captured by the pellets of the shotgun. You don't do that. You use a pea shooter. You use something that's much more fine and direct. So you pilot it, he shouted. You pilot it. You pilot it. Which again speaks to how your action plan should look. Because you want to turn things around in stages. And you can see the timeline he's looking at here. At the declining performance stage, school cultures need to encourage teachers and so forth. I'm not reading all of this to you, but you can see the lessons are all here. Now, what they're talking about is a premise that is implicit in much of what's here, but I want to just really bang it home my own way. All right, first of all, you see there's this particular article has 8 key findings that you could use, okay, in different ways. The point I want to make is what's in this in Dr. Coase's book, actually, and that would be what we call collaborative inquiry. Now, again, I apologize. I can't bring up. I have the Coase book on my Kindle, but I don't have it. I don't know how to bring it up on my computer. So I'm working from it from my iPad and just speaking to it for a little bit. But what Dr. Coase talks about here is a phrase that's been given too much short shrift. That is to say, people give some lip service to it and move off of it. A couple of, at least 3 reasons for it, why it is not getting its love come to mind. One is many principals don't know how to do it or don't feel the need to do it. Along the lines of what that class, another class is observing. They've never seen it. They've never been asked what they think. He shouted scornfully. So the value system isn't there. That's number 2. Number 2, the value system isn't to a collective, reflective inquiry into what's going on in the place. And the other part of it is they just simply don't know how to do it, or they don't want to make the time for it. And if they don't want to make the time for it, what does that mean? I'll say that again more slowly. If they don't want to make the time for the reflective inquiry, what does it mean? And if they don't choose to make that time happen, what's the future for a school like that? To perpetuate the existing mediocrity, to suddenly have some kind of revolution and turn itself inside out and improve itself? You can hear the tone of my voice that that's not the case. Or continue to just go along to get along because they can get away with it. You know, public schools, I'm not sure how many of you are in private schools, but public schools, for the most part, are public monopolies. They get threatened with getting closed down, but they don't get closed down for numbers of reasons. And so they can be the worst schools in the galaxy and can be allowed to continue because it's a publicly funded monopoly, like the Long Island Railroad is. How do you take out the Long Island Railroad? You can't. You may change the name of the Long Island Railroad, but the Long Island Railroad can still be the most miserable piece of transportation that it often appears to be. You're not going to build another set of railroads in another place. It's not going to happen. And the same with school systems. It's a public monopoly. What's a threat to public schools? A few. Homeschooling becoming increasingly popular. I'm not a big fan of homeschooling from my own personal experience, not my own children, but my experiences as a leader. Not a big fan, but it's a successful in a minor amount of cases. Another one is charter schools. Some of you may even be part of charter schools. And having been done some research on them, not a big fan, except for a couple of ones that operate on a whole different level. Parochial schools, whether it be Catholic schools or yeshivas, or I'm aware of some Christian private schools, and some private schools. There are private schools too that are out there if you have the money to send babies there. All together, put together, they don't really knock the public schools off their statue, off their pedestal, because the pedestal is too big. And so you can get away with a lot of stuff unless you really, drink the Kool-Aid. And that's a bad example of saying anything, because by drinking the Kool-Aid, I mean, if you know the story, the people who drank the Kool-Aid willingly committed suicide. They bought the vision of the corrupt leader, and he drank the Kool-Aid, and they all drank it because he drank it, and they all were happy with dying, I suppose. But if I'm talking about engaging or buying a vision, is a different approach to thinking about things. So when you look at Dr. Koz's chapter 2, she talks about collaborative inquiry. And by the way, collaborative inquiry, here's another thing it's not. Collaborative inquiry isn't a group of people, teachers who sit and principal or leadership, sitting around holding hands and doing kumbaya necessarily. It's about them having the skills to reflect. And you'll hear more about that when we see the finished video in a little while. Okay, so it's a skill set. You learn how to collaboratively inquire, how to use data, and to really get underneath what the data are about. You figure out ways, and here's a word you almost have never heard. I bet you have never heard the word. I don't think it's in this chapter, but we'll come to it my own way down the line. To perform action research. This is the stupidest example I probably will ever offer a class. When I was a principal, I enjoyed tremendous support from the staff. The staff was just a terrific, not everybody, but 95% were really wonderful, engaging people and sincerely committed to making it right. If I walked into a faculty meeting and said, I just read an article that if you swung by your toes, your reading scores would go up by 5%. The next day, if I walked into the classroom, some of them would be hanging by their toes. It's just the way they are. They believed when I brought research up, even though obviously there's no research to show that. But there is things called action research where a teacher could say, I don't know, can we talk about looking at contract learning, which I mentioned earlier. Can we see how that works? Can we just see how that works? Now, the yes but to that is that when you give permission for something like contract learning to work, or any innovation, you're putting kids on the line, and then sometimes obviously you're fearful of putting children, making children parts of experiments. But you can find a way to see whether or how contract learning could work, and that's what you call action research. So the teachers who do the action research, when it's structured properly, will come back and say, yeah, we tried it, and some of this worked, but some of it, no, we would not recommend to anybody else. What should we do about this? And the group, now they do a kumbaya. That's one of my sarcastic points. I don't mean for it. Now they engage and hold hands and say, let's all do this. But we also need to learn how to do it. So let's get some professional development in place. Enough said. So Alexa is reminding me that I have this coming up. You can hear everything's beeping over here. But I would point out table 2.1 particularly. Look what Marzano says about what the leadership is. They are change agents. They are communicators. They are culture builders. They facilitate reflective inquiry. They're the assessment and instruction leaders. They are the finding resources person. I don't agree with the boss one point. He says assessment and data analyst. I don't agree with that. I think everybody is, but they can certainly lead it. And they're the outreach person to make it happen. So there's about 8 or 9 different roles there. Did you consider what your leader would be for your multi-age classroom? I know you didn't, not yet. All right, we'll stop here because I have to start this other premise. But this chapter 2 in Dr. Koz's book is spot on, and so is Tomlinson and Finland book. I'll come back to those because I've been slacking off on those. I think they reinforce each other and reinforce each other well with this this chapter for Dr. Koz. So with that, I thank you. I hope that, and by the way, look for this video link on this agenda, and then on this agenda, which I haven't put up yet, you'll also see a YouTube link to the Finland conversation. So you have videos on the materials piece of the assessment premise that on this agenda that you should be looking at as well. A lot of video stuff this week. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.